Hi. Some of my customers have asked me to do this video showing how to rebind the thread on the joints of my flutes, and indeed this can be done on any wind instrument that needs to have thread rebinding. I supply flutes sometimes with cork, but the advantage of thread I find is that it enables customers to rebind them without returning them to me. So most of the flutes that I supply by default now are with bindings, unless a customer particularly asks. So let's start with what you will need. Firstly, taking one of my flutes, a Mapani flute with nice ivory rings without any keys on this one, and I've taken the thread off the middle joint so that it's ready for us to do the rebinding. It's good to clean off any old glue if you've removed the cork that might have been on one of my flutes, or indeed on any flute that you have, so that you have a nice clean wooden surface here. So having prepared your flute and stripped off any old binding or cork that's on there, we're ready to start. And we will need some thread, and I use embroidery cotton. The important thing here is it's embroidery cotton, not embroidery silk, and you can buy pretty much anywhere, and certainly on the internet, on eBay for example, this 6-stranded cotton, which can be broken down into 3 strands for a fine adjustment if needed, and I'll come to that later. But normally I just use this these single skeins of embroidery cotton to do the work. Colour choice is entirely down to you. I tend to use a dark red, but on some flutes, particularly on boxwood or lighter coloured flutes, a green looks very nice, or indeed black. So we will also need a sharp knife or a pair of scissors, but I tend to use a knife. It doesn't have to be a scalpel, it can be just any knife, providing it's sharp enough to cut the cotton, which we will need to do during the process. The other thing you'll need is some cork grease, which can be found in these cork grease dispensers, or alternatively I mix up my own cork grease, and there it is. We're going to slap some of that on. I'm going to do another video showing how to make this stuff so that you don't have to buy the cork grease, and you can make enough to last you an entire lifetime of flute playing. So, to the job. I'm going to cut into close-up now so that you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to do this left-handed because I'm left-handed. If you're right-handed, you're going to need to reverse the image in your mind as you do this, but I hope you'll be able to do that. If not, drop me an email and I'll get a friend of mine to do it for me in a right-handed video, and we'll reproduce the whole video as such. So, first thing is to do a very simple over and under knot and tighten that around the flute tenon. Now it's important that it's not in the middle here of the tenon, but towards one end. It doesn't matter which end you choose, but maybe a quarter of the way along from here to here, because we're going to do a few turns holding this nice and tight here. A few turns whilst keeping hold of this in your other hand until you get to the end of the tenon, and then come back quickly, maybe in 2 or 3 turns, and lock off the old tail here. Then comes the knot. Taking the thread in your left hand in my case, perhaps right hand in yours, and make a twisting motion in an anti-clockwise direction so that you get a loop. And then take that loop and pass the flute tenon through it and pull it nice and tight. At that point it's secure and safe, and using the sharp knife or scissors we can cut off the old piece of thread. I'm going to do that again and show that the important thing is, as I'm turning this, the thread is coming over the top of the joint. And when I've finished the knot, doing that turn, that anti-clockwise turn, and putting it over the flute like that, and tightening it up, the thread continues to come over the top. If I do the knot incorrectly and turn clockwise, I actually find it quite difficult to do it incorrectly, then the thread comes off the bottom of the joint underneath here, and the knot won't tighten properly. So it's important that when you do the knot, the thread comes over the top again. So I'll do that one more time, making the loop with an anti-clockwise twist of your fingers, and then putting the tenon through. Now I've done 3 knots there, but you only really need 1. So having done now about half the tenon, just continue on to the end, nice and tight, holding it tight here. So that completes 1 full length, and then go back and do the same thing again, so that we'll then have 2 thicknesses of cotton on the tenon joint. Now, having got to the end, I usually come back a few quite coarsely, maybe 4 or 5 turns for the whole length of the tenon, and then I come back in and I just do another knot just to lock it off at this point. And now I get some of the cork grease and smear it onto the thread. Lots of it. We're going to cover this with a little bit more thread, but it's good to have some underneath the surface that we're going to finish off with. So having done that, I'm going to try it and see how loose a fit we have, and at the moment it's clearly too loose. So it's not going to take many more threads to make this nice and tight, and at this point I increase the tension here and do 1, 2, 3, 4, come back a bit and lock it off again with the knot, and then try it one more time. Still properly loose, so we'll keep going, but always now with quite coarse turns, so maybe 5 or 6 only per length, because I actually want to introduce a little bit of air and bounce into the thread so that it doesn't lock too tightly on the tenon. Now it's beginning to get nice and tight now, but it still will need a little bit more. Before I put the final turns of thread on, I'm going to put a bit more grease on, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, and lock it off again. Now it's beginning to get just about the right level of tension, but it will settle down as you put it on and off a few times. So I now wiggle the flute joint maybe a dozen times, and it will then become loose as the threads settle down. So that will then need another 1, 2, 3 and a lock off. Smear some grease around it again, and then try it again. That's just about right. It needs to be so that when you pull the flute it doesn't come apart, but if you grip it and pull, it comes apart easily, and it's not then putting strain on the wooden joints here. I think we could just put another couple on there just to tighten it up. So just 1, 2 and a lock off. Perfect. Finally, with the scissors or sharp knife again, cut that off, clean up with an old rag any excess grease that got smeared about, and a final try. Perfect. So it's as simple as that. It should take no more than a couple of minutes once you've got the hang of it, and it will take approximately 3 skeins of embroidery cotton to do the top joint and the other 2 joints, so we should get 4 tenons out of 3 skeins of embroidery cotton. Now, if you find that you have a loose flute joint and you don't want to rebind the whole thing, it's possible to take the thread and split it into 3 separate strands, 2 sets of 3 strands, because this 6-stranded cotton will come apart. And having done that, we can then add 2 or 3, depending on how you split it, strands, and it's amazing how little you will need to turn a quite loose tenon joint into a nice tight one. Now this can get a little bit unruly when you do this, and one trick that I like to do is just to take some cork grease and smear it on the thread. You don't need to do this when you're using all 6 strands, but that will mean that when you come to do your knots, they work nicely. If you don't do that, the cotton tends to unravel itself and doesn't behave very well. So using that technique, you can add a little bit of thread to an existing joint without having to redo the whole thing. So I hope that's explained how to rebind a thread joint on a flute or other wind instrument. And in order to do the 1, 2 and 3 tenons on a flute, you probably need 2 or maybe 3 skeins of cotton. If your first attempts are a bit loose and they don't stay well, they're not tight enough, then take them off, have another go. The skeins of cotton are quite inexpensive, and after 3 or 4 goes you should get the hang of it. I hope that enables you to restore your flute to its correct condition. If you've got any questions, please email me. You'll find my email address at our website, which is www.millyard-molem.com, and Google us, Google Millyard Flutes if you can't find that, and drop me an email if there's any questions you have about it. But I hope that helps, and happy flute playing.